Hi, my name is Aidan Jones and I am lucky enough to be here today with Karen McDermott. Today we will be learning about Yorkshire's wildlife and the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust. Would you mind starting by telling us your name and what you do for the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust?
Yes, hello, I'm Karen. I work for Yorkshire Wildlife Trust and my job is Nature Reserves Team Leader for West Yorkshire. So our team looks after a suite of nature reserves all across the west of Yorkshire, and our job is to manage the land and the habitats for the best benefit of wildlife, but also for the people that are enjoying those reserves.
How long have you been working for the Trust and what made you want to work there?
I've been working for Yorkshire Wildlife Trust for 16 years, and I did 4 years with another wildlife trust before that, so it's a long time, and I love it. I love the work that we do. I've always had a passion for nature. As a child I was out walking, I was in the garden finding bugs and looking in the pond, and to get to the point where I realised you could do that for a job and I could actually be protecting habitats and species for wildlife, it's just become a real passion and I can't imagine doing anything else.
Is the UK's wildlife being negatively affected by climate change?
Oh, that's a big question. Yes, but I'd say it's being affected in lots of different ways, both positive and negative. I think the main concern for us is the rate of change, and that species, or certainly some species, won't have the time or the ability to adapt. So, I mean, last year's drought was a great example. It meant, just one small example, that the flowering period for all of our flowering plants was really, really short because it was so dry and so hot. The plants just went into emergency mode and flowered and seeded in a really short period, and that means that everything that feeds on those plants, you know, your butterflies, your bumblebees, all of those things, then they're hatching and there's no flowers for them because they've already gone over. So one small example, but that's very directly a result of climate change, and I think species can cope in the short term, you know, as a one-off, but if this is going to happen year after year, that's our real concern.
What can people do to help reduce the negative effects?
Again, that's a big question. We as a trust are working much more landscape scale now, so we're thinking about connectivity of habitats rather than just preserving one little patch. That's not going to work in the future. We've got to connect things and allow things to move. So people at home, everybody can help with that in some small way. You know, wildlife gardening, just leaving those rough edges in your garden, allowing those spaces for wildlife to not just be locked in small areas. Anything that you can do in your community to get those green spaces, your road verges just wilded up a bit. Just small stuff. Don't feel it can't make a difference. It really can. Just have a go, do something.
Do you encounter littering, vandalism and destruction of property, and what effect does this have on the wildlife and the trust?
Yes, we do sadly have a lot of littering and fly tipping, theft, vandalism on our nature reserves. So these are really precious places that we're trying to keep for nature and for wildlife, and unfortunately not everybody knows what a nature reserve is and how to look after it. Some people just aren't interested, so yeah, we do get a reasonably high level of antisocial behaviour and fly tipping, and the effect of that on the wildlife is you have the direct effects, so you know, wildlife eating litter, plastic getting into birds' nests and tangling chicks in nests, so we see an awful lot of that sort of stuff, very direct effects, but it's wider than that, because every time somebody dumps some rubbish on a reserve, I have to go and find the means to clean that up. We have to pay for that as a trust. That takes resources away from the protection of wildlife and the restoration of habitats that we really should be spending our time on.
Dog and cat ownership has never been higher. What impact do these animals have on Yorkshire's wildlife?
Oh, I'm a pet owner myself. I have a cat. She was meant to be a house cat, but she doesn't want to be a house cat, so she does go out some of the time. I'm a big animal lover. I understand that the British public love their pets, but both dog and cat ownership, as you say, can be a real problem for our wildlife. Key things that you could do if you're a cat owner, I would say if you could do just one thing, I would keep your cat indoors at dawn and dusk in particular. Those are the times when they're most effective at hunting and when the wildlife is most vulnerable. If your cat needs to be outdoors, some supervised time during the day would be better for wildlife than having a cat flap where the cat comes and goes where they wish to. Dog ownership, the one key thing is keeping them on a lead and keeping them close to you, critically in the nesting season. So when everything's growing and everything's nesting, the bird breeding season runs from March till September, so it's quite a long time, but it is vitally important that wildlife isn't disturbed at that time of year. So just simply by keeping your dog close to you, you can make a massive difference.
Do you look after any animals when you're out working?
I've mentioned my cat, who is my three-legged cat. I also keep a flock of rare breed sheep. I like to support the traditional methods of livestock production, so I like to feel I'm doing my bit to help those traditional breeds. They're also my pets, they're my hobby. I get a lot of fulfilment of spending time with them, and also knowing that I'm producing good quality meat and wool in a sustainable way. So it keeps me busy.
How has the increased demand for housing affected Yorkshire's wildlife?
Well, that's particularly relevant to this nature reserve that we're at the moment. This is Sherburn Willows, one of our sites. There's been a lot of housing going up around in the local area recently, and then most recently there's a new development being proposed right next door. And while we need housing, I understand that, but this is a particularly small site, it's a fragile site, it's got very shallow soils, and we're worried about the increased footfall and the increased visitor pressure that we might see from that development. So that's the sort of thing that we need to manage and think about with the increased demand for housing.
Can I ask you about the proposed housing development near Askham Bog?
Yes, that was another big development that was planned, huge development on the edge of York. Askham Bog is our very first nature reserve. We got it in 1946, I think. It's a really rare type of bog habitat that needs protecting, and it was a huge development that was going to affect the drainage, which for a wetland site that would have been significantly damaging. So we had a big campaign. It took us several years, and our staff in our planning team fought the application for the housing, and some of you might have seen David Attenborough got involved. But it was actually all that hard work behind the scenes by Yorkshire Wildlife Trust that actually got that development turned down. But the publicity with somebody like David Attenborough is what brings it to people's attention.
How many sites does the Trust look after, and has this number increased or decreased, and why?
We manage over 100 nature reserves all the way across Yorkshire. I think it's 103 at the moment. The number has increased steadily over the years. We have to be careful what we take on because we have to be able to manage those sites well. It's not just about acquiring lots of land. What was the last part of the question, sorry?
And why have they increased?
Why have they increased? Because as an organisation we've really grown. When I started with the Trust, I was the 37th staff member. We've now got maybe 200 staff members. So as we've grown and as we've managed to generate more funding, we've had that capacity to take on more land and protect more habitats and more nature.
And finally, how can people support the Trust?
To support the Trust, you can join us, you could be a member. That pays our wages, it allows us to deliver lots of good work on the ground. But it doesn't have to be about money and about joining us. If you've got some spare time, volunteering for us is really, really useful. We deliver an awful lot of our nature work through volunteering. And as perhaps the biggest one is just do your bit at home. If you can just do a little bit for wildlife in your own life, then that's helping Yorkshire Wildlife Trust.
Thank you so much for watching my documentary. I hope you have enjoyed it and learned a little bit about Yorkshire's wildlife. And thank you, Karen, for your time today.
You're very welcome, Aidan. I've enjoyed it. Thank you.